When I moved into the house on the hill, I had no idea what was in store for me. It was an old building with almost a century of history. I was attracted by the low price and the panoramic view of the lake. I needed a fresh start, and this place seemed perfect. The residents of the neighboring town did not share my enthusiasm. There were forced smiles and hesitant glances when I told them I had bought the property. No one said anything directly, but the silence was as heavy as the floorboards that creaked under my feet. The day I arrived, the weather was grey, and a thin fog covered the hill. As I unloaded the boxes from the car, I noticed that some of the windows looked wrong. Maybe it was the reflection of the glass, but I felt as if the house was watching me. I didn't pay any attention. I was tired. I needed a quiet night and time to organize my things. The first night, I was awakened by a peculiar sound. It was a whisper, almost imperceptible. I thought it was the wind passing through the cracks in the windows. When I went downstairs to investigate, the living room was in darkness, except for a sliver of light coming from a half-open door in the hallway. I found this strange, since I knew that door led to a bedroom I had not yet entered. My courage wavered, and I decided to go back to the bedroom. The next morning I tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream. While I was tidying up the house, I found the basement door locked with an old padlock. The key hung on a hook in the kitchen and looked like it had never been used. My curiosity overcame my fear, and with a little effort I unlocked the door. A musty, dusty smell filled my nostrils. The basement was filled with old boxes, filled with books, photographs, and personal items from someone who had lived there long ago. It was like a reliquary of the past. There was a table in the corner with a diary open to a specific page. The words were blurry, but I could read enough to give me a chill. The last entry read, "She is in the house now." There is no escaping her. Who was she? The handwriting seemed hastily written, almost shaky. When I came back up to the surface, I felt as if something had changed. The air was heavier, and there were scratch marks on the door that I was sure hadn't been there before. A shiver ran down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. There had to be a rational explanation for everything. On the third night, I woke to the same whispering sound. But this time, it was clearer, almost as if someone was talking to me. I followed the sounds, barefoot and shaking, into the hallway. The shaft of light I had noticed the first night was there again. When I opened the door, the room was empty, but the smell of wilted flowers and rotting wood filled the air. That was when I saw the figure in the mirror, a pale woman with disheveled hair, staring at me with hollow, dull eyes. I ran to my room, locking the door behind me. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would stop. I grabbed my phone to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. I felt a presence in the room, as if something was watching me. I closed my eyes and prayed for it to end. In the days that followed, I tried to maintain normalcy, but the house wouldn't let me. Doors would slam shut on their own, objects would move, and footsteps would echo through the hallways when I was alone. I did some research into the history of the house and discovered that the last family who lived there had disappeared without a trace. Before that, there had been reports of unexplained deaths, all involving the previous residents. I decided to hire a paranormal expert. Mr. Eldridge was a skeptical man, but he accepted the job. He brought equipment and spent the night in the house. The next day, his hands were shaking as he showed me the recordings, distorted voices, muffled cries, and in one of them my own name being whispered. As we investigated further, we discovered a hidden room behind a false wall in the basement. Inside, strange symbols were painted on the floor and walls, as well as melted candles and a makeshift altar. The feeling was suffocating, as if the air were filled with hatred and pain. Eldridge suggested that it was part of some ancient ritual, but he couldn't say for sure what it meant. It was at that moment that the basement door closed by itself, leaving us in darkness. A guttural sound echoed through the space, something that seemed to come from all sides. Panic took hold of us, and we were only able to escape when we pushed the door with all our strength. That night, Eldridge decided to stay and try one last experiment. He used equipment to capture energy, and in the process the entity revealed itself. It was a woman, or something that had been a woman. She screamed, her voice full of agony. She wanted something, but we couldn't understand what. When Eldridge tried to communicate, he was thrown against the wall with an unearthly force. I knew I had to act. I picked up the journal I had found in the basement and began reading it aloud. The words seemed to enrage her, but they also weakened her. Little by little her presence diminished, and the atmosphere became lighter, but I knew it was temporary. The next morning I packed my things and left the house for good. I've never told anyone everything that happened there. The house is still standing, and every now and then I see news of new residents. They always leave quickly, without explanation. I survived, but I know the house will not stop until it finds someone who cannot escape. If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel for more content like this and share it with your friends. Many more chilling stories are yet to come. When I first saw the house, it seemed like a unique opportunity. It was a two-story building in a quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of the city. The peeling paint and dirty windows did not hide its architectural charm. I bought the house without hesitation, ignoring the implicit warnings from the real estate agent. He mentioned briefly that no one stayed there for long, but I attributed that to the need for renovations. On the day of the move, a feeling of unease took hold of me. It wasn't the silence, nor the house itself, but something deeper, as if the air there was heavier. As I unloaded the boxes, I noticed that my neighbors were watching me. It wasn't a curious look, but something between pity and discomfort. I tried to smile, but no one smiled back. I didn't pay any attention. I was too busy exploring every corner of my new home. That night, as I was unpacking, I heard something strange. A soft scraping of furniture coming from upstairs. I thought it was just the effect of the wind or the old wood settling in. But the sounds continued, rhythmic, like footsteps. I decided to investigate. I climbed the stairs slowly, feeling the floor creak beneath my feet. The house was in darkness, except for the faint glow of the moon coming through the windows. In the hallway on the second floor, I felt an unusual cold. I opened the doors one by one, but all the rooms were empty. In the last room, I found a rocking chair near the window. I didn't remember seeing it before. It was an old piece of furniture, made of dark wood, with marks of heavy use. The chair was tilted slightly forward, as if someone had just gotten up. A shiver ran down my spine. I went back to my room, trying to shake off my thoughts. But that night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same sound of footsteps and the slight creaking of the rocking chair. In the following days, I tried to keep busy with the renovations, painting, changing light bulbs, cleaning. However, the house seemed to resist the changes. The freshly painted walls would peel off within hours, and the furniture I moved would end up back where it had been. But what bothered me most was a locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway. The lock was rusty, and I didn't have the key. I tried to ignore it, but it was as if the door was calling me. One night, I heard something coming from there, a soft murmur, almost like muffled crying. I decided I had to open it. I forced the doorknob with a screwdriver until the wood gave way. Behind the door, I found an empty room, the walls covered in scratch marks. I didn't know what to make of it. It was as if the space had been the scene of something no one was supposed to witness. While I was cleaning the yard one day, an elderly woman approached. She was wearing a flowered dress and had a distant, almost haunted look in her eyes. Without introducing herself, she began talking about the house. "You know what happened here, don't you?" she asked. I shook my head and she continued, "Years ago a woman lived here with her son. She disappeared, and the boy, well, they say he never left." I felt a chill, but I didn't want to show my discomfort. I thanked the woman and went back inside. Her words echoed in my mind. There was something in the house, and now I knew for sure. That night, the manifestations got worse. Objects fell from shelves, lights flickered, and the rocking chair squeaked incessantly. I tried to ignore it, but at 3 a.m. I heard a child's laughter. It was soft, almost innocent, but completely out of place. The next morning I went to the house of my nearest neighbour, a lonely man named Mr. Huxley. He seemed reluctant to talk, but after prodding, he revealed something disturbing. The boy's name was Oliver. He was strange, always talking to someone no one could see. After his mother disappeared, Oliver was found dead in the bedroom. Since then, the house has taken on a life of its own. That was a blow. I was living in the place where a terrible tragedy had happened. But why had no one mentioned it before? Mr. Huxley just shook his head, as if it were something everyone would rather forget. That night, something changed. It wasn't just sounds or objects moving anymore. As I stood in the living room, I felt a presence. I looked up and saw the silhouette of a boy at the top of the stairs. He seemed to be watching me, motionless. His eyes were shadowed, but I could feel their intensity. "Oliver?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just pointed to the bedroom door that had been locked before. I climbed slowly, each step filled with fear. When I entered the room, I saw something I would never forget. The rocking chair, now occupied by a woman. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, and a macabre smile formed on her lips. She whispered something I couldn't understand before disappearing, leaving the rocking chair alone. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my things and left the house that same night. As I drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the house's lights flickering, as if it were alive, saying goodbye. I never went back to that street. Today, the house remains abandoned. Every now and then I hear rumors of new residents, but they all leave quickly. They can't stay, just like me. I bought the house in an attempt to start over. It was an old mansion at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by dense trees. It wasn't my first choice, but the price was irresistible, and at the moment, all I needed was a place to rebuild my life. The residents of the neighboring town avoided talking about the house. When I mentioned that it would be my new home, I received suspicious looks and whispers that seemed to never end. I ignored it, believing it was just country folk superstition. After all, every town has its stories and legends. On the first day, I noticed something strange. The house had a peculiar smell, like wet wood mixed with something metallic. As I explored the rooms, I found a door in the basement that seemed to have been closed for decades. The marks on the wood indicated that someone had tried to force it open, but never succeeded. I decided to leave that for later, focusing on the more urgent repairs. A few nights later, I heard something coming from the basement. It was low, almost imperceptible, like a whisper or the sound of light footsteps. I ignored it, attributing the noise to the wind or to small animals that might have entered through a crack. But the sounds continued, becoming clearer and clearer. On the third night, I went down to the basement with a flashlight and a piece of pipe, prepared for anything. The place was colder than the rest of the house, and the flashlight seemed dim, as if the light was being absorbed by the walls. When I got close to the locked door, I smelled a strong smell of iron and something I couldn't identify. A feeling of unease grew in me, but once again I blamed my mind for making up stories. I left the basement quickly, but that night I dreamed about the door. I dreamed that it was open, and on the other side there was something, or someone, watching me. The days passed, and I began to notice subtle changes in the house. Objects that I was sure I had left in one place appeared in another. Pictures that I had hung would fall for no reason. And one morning, I saw footprints on the kitchen floor, as if someone had walked there barefoot. The worst part was when I saw a figure through the window. It was a woman, dressed in something old-fashioned, looking into the house. I went out to confront her, but she was no longer there. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been around. At the market, I asked the residents about the house again, but most of them avoided answering. until a lady, Mrs. May, came over and said quietly, "They won't leave you alone. They won't while you're there." Mrs. May told me that decades ago the house had belonged to a reclusive family. There were rumors that they performed strange rituals in the basement, but nothing was ever proven. One day, the house was found abandoned. There was no sign of the family, only dark stains in the basement that no one could remove, no matter how hard they tried. These stains were behind the locked door. When I asked if she knew anything about it, Mrs. May just made the sign of the cross and left me alone. That night, the sounds in the basement came back, louder than ever. This time, they included something that sounded like laughter. But it was cold, emotionless laughter, as if someone were mocking me. I decided I had to know what was behind the door. I bought tools and spent an entire afternoon trying to open it. Finally, with a loud click, the lock gave way. Behind the door was a small room with walls covered in strange symbols. In the center was a chair with rusty chains. The metallic smell was unbearable, and the air seemed heavier inside. Something was engraved on the wall. They belonged to the house, and now you do too. Before I could figure out what it meant, I heard a sound behind me. When I turned, I saw the same woman from the window, now inside the basement, with empty eyes and a smile that chilled my blood. I ran out of the house and spent the night in the car, but that didn't help. During the early morning hours, I saw figures around the vehicle, whispering my name. No matter where I was, the house kept reaching out to me. I returned to the house the next day, determined to find a way to put an end to it. With gasoline and matches, I prepared to do what seemed like the only solution. Before I lit the fire, I heard one last whisper and laugh. They were no longer trying to scare me. They sounded furious, as if they knew what I was going to do. As the first flame touched the basement walls, a deep scream echoed through the house. I ran outside and watched as the flames consumed everything. Days later, the wreckage was still smoldering. I moved out of town and never went back.